Hey everybody, it's Jessica. Welcome back to another episode of Career Coaching with Jessness. This is one of my series on interview tips and strategies. And today, this is for you if you are interviewing and preparing for a second or third round and you know who the people are that you're going to be interviewing with. So oftentimes the first and second round are either with like an HR rep or a recruiter or maybe a first-time hiring manager. This episode can also apply to that, but the key is to know who it is that you're going to be interviewing with before. I'm sure that you do know that, but I've heard from people that they sometimes don't know who the people that are in the interview or on the panel is. So I would recommend, if you don't and you're working with a recruiter or the direct hiring manager, to simply ask and say, hey, this round, who's going to be in the room or on the phone. That way you can do a little bit of this prep. And trust me, this prep can go a long way. It doesn't take long, and it can really set you apart from the other people interviewing for the gig. This episode was also inspired by a handout, a resource that I have in my career success guides on my website, and you can find a link in the show notes below. So a big part of landing the job is, of course, having the right skills, right? I got to know that the company needs to know that you have the right skills to come in and successfully do the job. So a big part of that is, have they done it before in the past, or do they have the transferable skills that it takes to do the job? Okay, cool. We're on the same page there. Another part of landing the job is influencing the person that you're on the phone with, that you are the right fit for the role. Everyone's going to read your resume, or if you're lucky, skim it. And so, okay, you've gotten this far. Chances are your resume matches the job description to enough extent to where they're giving you this round of speaking live. That's the best case scenario. But now that you're in live with them, you need to make sure that you are connecting the dots for the person and making it very, very clear and easy so that the person that you're chatting with is listening to your answers and going, yes, this is the right person for the job. One of the ways that you can influence a person too is to be relevant to them and knowing your audience. So I'm going to give you some examples in a second, but this is where some of that prep comes into play. Like if you know you're speaking with a CFO versus a peer versus your boss's boss versus an HR rep, you may decide to dip into your job experience and pull out relevant examples that are really going to speak the language of the person you're speaking with. You don't want to go into every single interview and just be like a copy and paste answer from the previous one if you're talking to someone that's in a different role or has different wants and desires and needs. So it's really the art of influencing here. And this is really going to help too, because you're putting yourself in the seat that of being hired already. And part of that is going to be, working cross-functionally or with these other people. And if they're chatting with you and hearing about your experience and you're speaking their same lingo and you're talking about the things that matter to them, like their own goals or things they're working on or whatnot, they're going to already be able to paint the picture in their head that, Jessica's the right fit for this job. I could really see how we could work together and how her skills match what I'm going for, or in other words, my goals that I have to accomplish too. And so it's one of the ways to, don't rely on the person to connect the dots for you. You need to do that legwork, and that's going to, I promise, speed your interview processes and fly you through each interview step, because that relevance is everything, right? And it's attention grabbing, and having that clear communication is going to just speed up their level of understanding with what you've got and then how it's going to relate to them. So let's give some examples here. So if I'm meeting with the CFO, which in a previous interview round when I was going for, gosh, a job now 10 years ago. Good God. One of the last rounds was speaking with the CFO. So I didn't choose to talk about how I boosted employee engagement through my learning and development programs. I didn't talk about how I improved, talent action plans with each of the departments by doing XYZ. I talked about how I saved the company money. I talked about the data-driven decision making that I did my day-to-day. Yes, it's related to learning and development because that's my world, that's my job, that's my expertise. But I chose from my experience to give examples about how this program was able to create value for the company in X amount of dollars. I talked about how I switched from one learning management system to another, and it resulted in X amount of cost savings. I talked about how when I went to make a decision on a process that we were going to do for a high potential learning program, how I used data to make those decisions. So I tried to get into the mind of the CFO and what does he care about, right? Cost savings for the company, value creation, and oftentimes very data-driven decision making. So I used that knowledge of, what's in a CFO's head and pulled out experience that's relevant to him, right? Say you're meeting with a peer in your department. You're going to want to focus on examples of teamwork. How do you involve your team members? What is your communication style? How do you like to collaborate and brainstorm? Maybe you share an example or a story about a project that you had to work on with your peer and how you both came up with who owned what and what the outcome was, right? So that can be an example, like thinking about what's your peer going to think about when they're listening to you is, do I want to work with this person? Is this person somebody that I could see myself chatting with day to day, collaborating, having to team up on things? And so having that filter in view and, of course, staying relevant with the examples that you share. Perhaps you are meeting with your boss's boss. So, somebody that's, one step above the person you're going to be interviewing with. You may want to highlight, okay, how your work or an example of your work, and the more specific you can be here, the better. I would recommend being extremely specific. And I'm going to get into a little bit of a method for answering any question at the end of this. But you're talking to your boss's boss. You're going to want to highlight the big picture impact. So your boss's boss is probably not going to be as in touch with your day-to-day tasks, but more so how those day-to-day tasks impacted the overall strategy or the overall department goal. So if you've got an example from your experience on, here's a project that I worked on, and here's how it fit into the greater HR vision. Here's how it created efficiency across teams, or some kind of, maybe it was a project that impacted multiple parts of their department. You're going to want to highlight something from that, from your resume, from your experience. Okay, so you can see where I'm going with this, right? Knowing your audience, thinking about what matters to them, what keeps them up at night, and then if you've got a relevant, clear example that's real, that's true, share that and really connect the dots for them. This episode is brought to you by my Brain Dates, one-on-one conversations where we figure out your next move together on a variety of topics. You can learn more on my website, jessnessrequired.com, under the Work With Me tab. I'll give one more example. So say you are speaking with your manager, your direct supervisor. You're going to want to think about the examples of how you execute. when you get a task, what's the first thing you do? How do you go about starting that? What are some things that you consider? And giving real examples of, here was the goal, here's what I did, here's how I did it, blah, blah, blah. You're going to want to talk about how you solve problems and the specific problems you have solved, specific problems that have come up, what you did to solve them, and then what the outcome was. And then how you manage your work, right? Keeping things running smoothly, being able to execute on goals, that kind of thing. All right. The more that you can showcase, look, I run my own book of business and I'm here and can manage and be an owner of the work that is provided to me, the more they're going to go, okay, this isn't just going to be an employee or a direct report. I can see this person being almost a partner to me based on how they approach their work. They own it, they do it, they learn from it, and have given me some specific examples. So that is one of the ways that you can really speed up your interview process by being super tailored to your answers to align the person that you're interviewing with, okay? And I wanted to touch too just on how to go about answering your questions. So I am a huge fan of the STAR method. You probably have heard it before, but going through and as you are writing out what examples you're going to share from your experience, you can simply just bullet point it out. I am a huge fan of bullet pointing what I'm going to say. I have that in front of me, or I read through it before I go into the interview, and I can just understand, Jess, here are the highlights. I'm going to hit these highlights. And then it's not too overwhelming to where, okay, I've got to memorize all these paragraphs of examples. You just bullet point it out. So here are the 4 bullet points in the STAR method. So first is the situation. What is it? Give some context. Okay, well, we were tasked with determining what topics are going to be standard and relevant and taught to all leaders across the globe. Okay, that's the situation. All right, T, task. What is the task you individually had? Chances are there's going to be multiple tasks. Get specific. All right, within that project, my goal as lead and my tasks were to run the meetings weekly, figure out the strategy, define the success metrics, work with our data analytics team to get insights, validate the topics that we were proposing to be standard across the globe, across the company. You get the idea, right? So use I statements here. Try to not use we or us or whatever. So don't shy away from what you specifically did, because if you keep using we did this, we did that, then they're not going to know what you specifically owned, and therefore they're not going to have as clear of a picture of what your skill level and understanding of it is. So even if it was group work or whatever, be sure to parse out what your individual contribution was from that. All right. So you're explaining just kind of, all right, here's the situation, the context. Here are the tasks involved with that. Okay, the A in STAR, what action did you individually take? All right, well, we had to validate the topics that were going to be standard across the globe for all leaders to take. One of the actions that I took was I created a survey, and we surveyed all managers that manage the group of people that would be taking these topics. Okay, so being very specific with that. And then finally for R, what's the result of the action you personally took? So yeah, that survey went out to 371 managers. We had 105 people respond, and we took that information and parsed it out and were able to validate 20% of the topics were not validated. And so we focused on the 80%, and we went forward and created a learning program for that specific group of leaders. Okay, so that's just an example. So you're going to want to have in your back pocket a few of these. So taking your examples that are relevant based on the type of person you're interviewing with through the STAR method. So you may have, okay, CFO, what's my STAR method? And fill that out for an example for him or her. For, my boss's boss. All right, I'm going to have a STAR method answer for that. For your direct boss or your peer, same thing. You're going to want to take yourself through the STAR method. Even if they don't, ask super specific questions, you're going to feel so much better having done some of that prep and understanding, because you're going to go in heck of a lot more prepared than the next person that did not put this relevance filter on. Okay. And I promise you, it'll speed things up. So as I mentioned in the beginning, the resource handout is a great, guide for you. It's free. It's on my website. The link's in the show notes. And have a think about this. Give this a go and let me know how it goes for you. And I'm wishing you the best. All right. See you on see you on another episode. This episode is brought to you by my Brain Dates, one-on-one conversations where we figure out your next move together on a variety of topics. You can learn more on my website, justnessrequired.com, under the Work With Me tab.